As the Hatter took his foot from off the Admiral's chest, a small brass antenna extended from the left side of his hat. "Mr. Mamer," spoke the Hatter to thin air, "have we acquired our souvenir?" A series of garbled static noises sounded from within the captain's hat, at which he smiled. "Splendid!" he exclaimed. "Tell Lytton to bring her about." Von Arkham turned his back on the Admiral, who was still writhing in pain on the floor, and swaggered towards the front of the cabin. Commander Fielding lowered his sword, anticipating the Hatter's next move. "Well, me lads, as it is clear that there is no chance of a cup of tea on this vessel, I shall take my leave of you." The crewmen were silently relieved at this announcement, and stood back as the Hatter made his way to the helm, and threw the lever to retract the storm barrier. As the metal shutters slid away, the bridge was once again filled with the howling wind let in by the aperture in the glass shield. The crewmen steadied themselves on the walls of the cabin and stared out at the still, turbid sky. The Hysteria had flown about, and now hovered before the Bellerophon's bow. At this distance the men could see the mad ship in all its glory. The looming silhouette of its armored balloon stood out against the lightning-rent ether like some powerful sky beast of myth. The giant brass skull adorning its bow grinned like its captain, the spiral sphere in its right eye socket spinning madly. An enormous chain hung suspended from the hull of the vessel, and hanging from the end of the chain was an object that the crew did not immediately recognize, but gasped in shock when they did. It was one of the Bellerophon's propellers. "I do hope you don't mind flying in circles for a few hours," the Mad Hatter shouted over the wind, "because that's how long the resonance storm will last." Putting one foot through the aperture, he turned about to face Commander Fielding once more. "Have you ever been to New Zealand, Algy? I hear it's lovely this time of year. Cheerio!" And with that, the mad-hatted captain stepped out into the wild ether, falling out of sight of the commander and his crew, but gliding back into sight moments later with his mechanical wings extended. All the men watched as he soared across the sky and landed on his feet on the Hysteria's deck, and they continued to watch as the ship of legend sailed through the monstrous clouds, towing the absconded propeller beneath it. And not until it was gone from view did Commander Fielding walk down from the command deck and shut the storm barriers himself. With the bridge quiet once more, Fielding turned to look at the Grand Admiral lying in pain on the cabin floor. He thought of the Vanguard and its former commander. He thought of how it had felt to shoot down a superior officer, and how strange it was that his only regret had been not listening to the mad-hatted maverick that had warned him of the commander's intentions. Edward von Arkham was an enemy of the Empire with more regard for the welfare of its people than one of its utmost servants and protectors. Perhaps such a realization had widened Fielding's perception of his duty, and those whom he served. Fielding stared at the Grand Admiral's red, scalded face. His mechanical eye had been superheated by the steam, and was burning his eye socket. "Escort the Grand Admiral to the infirmary," he declared. Two men lifted the Admiral onto their shoulders and led him out of the cabin. The helmsman turned to Commander Fielding. "What do we do now, sir?" he asked. "Prepare a wire to be sent to England when this storm has passed," replied the commander. "Request mechanical assistance and an escort home. In the meantime, have the engine room repair as much as they possibly can on their own." "We're going home, sir?" "Yes." This mission has been compromised. Aye, Commander. The crewmen hurried to obey, calling down to the engine room, sweeping the broken glass off of the floor. And as they did, Fielding returned to the command deck and thought of New Zealand, and whether or not he had relatives there.